Thanks for rising up. I'm Dawn Ennis, and welcome to our first episode of 2020. Topping the news, we asked you last episode about the impeachment of President Donald Trump and how you would vote if you could. Here are the results of my unscientific poll. Only 5% felt it was enough to simply impeach Trump. A whopping 95% of you voted that he should not only be impeached but also removed. Nobody voted to leave things as they are and just let the voters decide next November. Also, no one chose to vote that they don't really care. The only real change from the November poll was that back then, 6% of you voted to leave it up to the voters. By the time you're seeing this, we all pretty much know how things turned out. A huge crowd turned out in West Hartford in January to celebrate the 71st anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I was honored to be chosen to read a portion of the Declaration and to be a part of this uplifting event. There was music, and a call for action.
Universal Declaration of Human Rights declaring that
Kamora Herrington is one of those calling for action. She is the founder of Kamora's Cultural Corner, a resource for the Black queer community and the larger community in Hartford. She's an award-winning advocate for queer youth and a powerful speaker. Welcome, Kimora.
Thank you so much, Tom.
I'm so glad you could be here. This was an experience like I haven't had. Usually when someone is a motivational speaker, there's either an excitement or a buzz, or it's like, oh, when will she shut up? And I could have listened to you go on. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you noticed, but as you left the front of the room, I was chasing after you to make sure I didn't miss you. You told a story from the Bible about Moses. And what I thought was interesting is that you compared those of us of a certain age to Moses in terms of our children. Now, your youngest is a lot younger than my youngest, but I can relate in terms of they're going to experience things long after we're gone. So tell us the Moses story and tell us why that's relevant now.
Okay, and that's a story or a parable that's come up as I look at what my place in this work is. So to tell you why that came up, I've got to give you a little bit of what came before me.
Roll
okay?
out.
So here we go.
Unfurl.
Right? And we'll only go back a couple generations. But my parents cared a whole lot about civil rights. My father is a black man, child of sharecroppers, came up through the Great Migration, left Alabama, came up to Bristol, Connecticut. And his parents came up because they're going to make a better world for him, okay? And they had this idea that desegregation was part of that. And my father grew up, went to school, got his education, and he wanted to do what he needed to do to make the world a better place. At the same time, my mother was doing the same thing. She's, WASP from New England, white woman, actually right here in West Hartford, but trying to figure out what to do to make the world a better place. So my father went and he got his degree in social work from an historically black college, and my mother went and started doing work for the Human Rights Commission in Hartford. And this was their way of making a better society. They met each other, my brothers and I happened, and we learned at the feet of these people. So my father went to the high school that he went to was a school for workers' children. It was this, and that's an interesting story, but he went to a progressive school with a whole bunch of communists and this interesting progressive way of doing things, and those were the adults who were around us as young people. So as children, I remember listening to these old Vietnam vets talk. And I remember in the 80s wondering why they couldn't let this go. But today I can talk about some stuff that happened in my lifetime to young people, and I'm sure that in front of me they're saying, why won't this lady let this stuff go? But all these different fights have come up in my lifetime. So my parents, they were fighting miscegenation, so they needed to live in a world where black people and white people could marry each other and have these wonderful lives. Hello, I'm a lesbian. What was one of the big fights of my lifetime? As queer people, as gay people, as lesbians, can we marry each other? So the fight continues. And so looking at myself in that place and realizing that I am a black lesbian. I was a teen mom. So my oldest is 30. I had my first child when I was 18. Isaiah kind of fell into my life when I was 40. So I've been the
And
mom.
he's 7?
He's 7 now.
Beautiful.
He turns 8 next month. But, so I've been the mom who is the too young mom in the room. And now I am literally 1 year older than a grandfather in my son's classroom. So I'm in this strange gap place, and I fight. And in the queer world, I'm very often fighting to bring issues of race and culture into the conversation. And in the Black world, I'm very often bringing issues of gender and orientation into the conversation. So that's where I need to be. And in a liberated world, in a liberated society, we're not fighting. The skills that I've had to develop in order to do the work that I need to do during this lifetime comes from a basis of being comfortable being uncomfortable. Comes from a place where I need to be comfortable challenging people, and challenging people in ways that can be emotionally very dangerous.
People are afraid.
People are so scared. People are scared and they don't know that it's fear. They don't know what it is, and that's dangerous fear.
Don't they also think sometimes, or at least if they don't think it, they act angry because they can't name their fear?
Yes. And we all do. So very often when I'm out there, please know that when you see me out there and I'm clawing and I'm screaming for my people, it's because I'm scared of what's going to happen to my people. And you know who are my people? We're all my people. But that Moses analogy comes from, I'm here to do the fighting. We know Moses did some fighting. Moses was angry. Moses threw things. Okay.
Kick a rock, hit a rock
I'm
with a
not the
stick.
rabbi, so I'm not the person who should be like really, really, really telling the story. But it's a story that I kind of identify with, in that I'm here to lead folks. My job is not to figure out liberation. That's the next.
That's the promised land.
Yeah, that's the next group. So I look at Isaiah and my 7-year-old. Here he goes, my Isaiah, and he can walk through this world in a different way.
Because of the work you did.
Yes. And so that's where we are. So that place of liberation, I have to truthfully live in this world where I segregate my identities to bring together the truth of the oneness of my identities. And in liberation, that doesn't have to happen. So that's where the Moses analogy comes in.
I think it's beautiful. Now, I am way too white. I am whiter than white. I'm like, Casper white. And I know that part of my job here on earth is to raise up voices of the people more marginalized than I am. As a woman, I'm marginalized. As a trans woman, I'm marginalized. But I still had 40 years of male privilege to get me where I am. I can't forget that. So I try to raise up other voices. My question to you is, as I do that, why am I in a position to either shut up or speak out? What's the right choice? Because I think there is no right answer to that. Sometimes it's beholden to us, white folks, to shut up and let other people speak. And other times, we gotta talk. And it's the failure of a lot of us not to speak up. What was it Martin Luther King wrote in the Birmingham jail? He wrote about the biggest enemy is not the bigots, but it's the white people who do nothing.
Yes.
So tell me where you stand on that whole issue. And it's a complicated
dance.
issue. It's a dance.
It's a dance.
Oh, I dance terribly.
That's good. Fall over your feet a couple times, pull it back together.
I just got to get rhythm is the problem.
That we could talk about that for days.
Oh, I bet.
And that figuring out that rhythm of walking with each other. But there's a documentary, when we talk about being the voice for the voiceless,
Yes.
and then we talk about the arrogance of thinking that you can speak for anyone else, right?
Yeah.
So as we have both of those conversations, we need to understand what and where our privilege lies and where we can be effective. So there's this documentary that I love to use, and it's called Out at Work. And in it, this is a documentary that talks about what it's like to be queer outside in the workplace. So how that affects us. But one of the vignettes in there is there's a woman, she's a lesbian, and she's a photographer, which means that she's really good behind the camera. That is her place, that's her comfort, that's her world. And you see some examples of her work, and she's a gifted photographer. She can tell beautiful stories with what she photographs. And she and her wife are discriminated against, and horrible things happen, and there's a huge rally at the State House. And she's not up there running her mouth at all. The activists are up there, and the activists have their facts and figures, and they're doing what they want to do. And then the camera shows us where she is, because she's there at the rally, but she's way, way back, documenting it and taking the photographs.
That's her place, her chosen place.
And that's her place, and that's her chosen place. And I think about that, and I use that. But then I think about many of the Black mothers who I have represented. And gave you a little bit of my background, so I come from a world where I've been in front of cameras talking about the rights that human beings need to have since I was 2 years old, for real. This has been my life. I've been groomed to do this, I'm good at this, I enjoy this, and I can take the heat. One of the first times that I stood in public loudly and proudly for a Black mother whose child had been abused, the woman who I met before any of this happened was not anyone who ever had any desire to be in front of any camera. And she was a woman who at that time in her life was getting abuse from the community in all of the ways, and the community was blaming her for what happened to her child. And as I was meeting this woman, I was hearing from her, and he's not the best, and I'm not the best, and but all these places of self-blame that didn't need to be there. And there needed to be something between her and the world. So for those of us who stand up, we need to understand the importance of that place, and we need to work super, super hard at making sure that the people who we're representing them well and correctly in the way that they want to be represented. Definitely the way that they want to be represented. But there are times when we need to speak for other people. And that's a beautiful and blessed place to be. I often am imploring white folks to talk about what I need them to talk about. Heterosexual folks to talk about my queer stuff. Black folks to talk about my queer stuff. I mean, you need to understand the power and privilege that you bring. When this angry lesbian shows up screaming about the needs of Black queer children, who cares? Of course. You give me a black cishet man and a white cishet man, and have them stand up and loudly proclaim that little Black queer kids. Yes, and they'll listen with a different ear. And so we need to really think about that. And then there are times when we need to realize that we're running our mouths just because we like to run our mouths. And then it's time to shut up, sit down, and recalibrate, figure out what your place is.
If I were to walk into, is it 1023 Albany Avenue in Hartford, into Kamora's Cultural Corner, what will I find? What's there?
It depends. It completely depends on the day of the week. It completely depends. So the physical space that you would walk into, and the way that we set it up is you walk into a foyer that is all different blues, because these represent all the different oceans and waters that brought us here. Okay? So that's
400 years, right?
Yes, 400 years plus some. So you walk into this space, and then you walk into a larger space. And in that larger space, there are bookcases, and there are bookcases that have books that you can take, and there are bookcases that have books that you can look at, but you better not take it out of this space. Okay. Yes, we've got some great books. Okay. We've got games, we've got arts and craft supplies, we've got special arts and craft supplies, we've got everyday arts and craft supplies, we've got a television with a VCR and a DVD player, and some of the coolest VHSs that you'll ever find anywhere. Yesterday, what I had playing for most of the day, just because we're going to be using it soon, is the Ruth Ellis story. And Ruth Ellis is a lesbian who lived to be 100 years old, born in 1899, a Black lesbian. So that if you had shown up yesterday, that's what would have happened. So there would have been conversations around that and just some meetings. If you walked in on Monday, you would have walked in on an NA meeting, because in that neighborhood, there isn't an NA meeting that meets regularly there. So we now provide that. And so as we talk about Kamora's Cultural Corner, we come from a Black, queer, Afrocentric perspective. The NA meeting, I'm not sure if anyone in that meeting is queer or not. I can tell you that there are people in the neighborhood, and there are people who need a community gathering space to be.
Right.
Yeah, if you were to walk in there today, so today is Wednesday. Right now, Olu, Fire, and Wanza are setting up for a community conversation tonight, and tonight's community conversation is going to be about the Hartford Arts Council is creating these wonderful new positions for artists who represent the city of Hartford. We're going to have a bard, we're going to have a troubadour, we already got a poet laureate. So they're setting up for that, and this conversation has a PowerPoint, so I know that they're playing with technology and the sound system. That's happening today. Tomorrow there's going to be the Engaged Mind Sangha. So a group of folks who get together and practice mindfulness will come together, and they have their potluck luncheon, and then they'll have their conversation. But we really are a community gathering places for all of the different ways that people need to be. Sunday is intergenerational Sunday, and Sunday is just a hodgepodge of ridiculousness. I am this peace-loving, I fight, but I'm this peace-loving lesbian. I have a whole lot of feelings about football that we could fill days with. And so when the idea of watching football was first brought up, I was like, no, we are not bringing that energy in here. That's not. And the men who brought it up to me were, so there are black queer men. The men bringing this up were black queer men who brought up this idea that football creates a space where men can share emotion and can have conversation. And I stepped back because we practice cultural humility, and that's a very, very important thing for me. And I realized, okay, so I'm not down with this thing at all. Yeah. But you guys really do. It's important to you, and you bond over this. And there's this place where this masculine male bonding thing is so foreign to me that I've missed it. That I've just seen a bunch of meatheads getting together, objectifying women, practicing all kinds of icky, awful things.
Cheerleaders.
And so this has created a place where I don't see the beauty that you see. So, okay, football happens on Sundays.
All right, at least until the Super Bowl is over. So let me ask you this. You mentioned a little bit about having to make choices. And one of the things you also talked about at the Declaration event was that sometimes there's a table. And it may not be your table, and it may not be my table, and you may not be invited to sit at that table, but you have to respect the fact that there are people who will have that table. Why don't you walk me through that? I want to understand that better because I've been reacting for a couple of years now to it's probably time for white, cisgender, heterosexual men to get up from the table and give their seats to some of the marginalized folks who never got a seat at the table.
Yes.
So talk to me about that.
Yes.
You're not saying that get rid of that, right?
No. But know that I am going to, for all of the reasons, come from that middle gray area. So there is no black and white when you're dealing with me. We don't get there at all. It can't be there. And there are definitely places where white cis het men have taken up far too much space in all of the wrong ways.
Washington, D.C. would be one of those places.
So in
West
all
Hartford
the wrong
Town
places,
Hall.
in all the wrong ways, and it's time for them to give up power and truly give up power, not step back from power, but give up power. That needs to happen. There are definitely tables that need to be opened up and expanded, and more voices need to come to those tables. And I will say, Hollywood, I'm really tired of rolling my eyes at every television, everything. It's like, you really missed that? You really missed that?
Oscar's so male, too,
there we go.
I know.
But who are the people who are making the decisions?
Yeah.
Let's change the tables, let's change the tables. But then there are places where we need to create our own tables.
Okay.
And there are places where we need to understand that table, the only way that table is going to get better is if we all step back and don't support that table. And there are many places where the window dressing of a woman or a black person or a Latina person is kind of thrown in there to give this illusion of some kind of growth.
Tokenization is what you're talking about.
This wonderful tokenization. And you can have a beautiful all-black board advancing white supremacy happily advancing white supremacy. Putting different words on it, we're not selling out, we're buying in, all this good stuff, where that's not happening. But I think that whenever we're looking at any of these so-called tables, we need to look at what changing it is going to do and how changing it is going to affect a larger world. So going back to football, since we were just talking about football.
Okay.
We had Colin Kaepernick and we had folks kneeling. We had this whole thing around the national anthem. At the KCC, we sing the Black national anthem.
I don't know what that is.
Lift Every Voice and Sing, and it's a beautiful
that song I know, but I didn't know it was called that.
It is. And so I grew up with the Negro National Anthem. And I grew up in a world where there was a definite space where every big, large community event was going to start with a national anthem, and it was our national anthem. So therefore, we didn't have to be in reaction to that other national anthem. So as we are here, right now, one thing that we do at the KCC, we're not having that conversation. And this was a big part of the conversation around having football in the space.
Sure.
Do we want to be in reaction? Do we want to figure out how to grow and expand, or do we want to do our own thing? So as we're doing our own thing, and again, we are coming from, we do not serve only Black, queer, Afrocentric folks. But we claim and call ourselves that because the truth is the majority of spaces out there are white, cis, hetero, Eurocentric spaces. And do we really want to figure out how we all can fit into white, cis, hetero, Eurocentric space? Or do we want to experience what a different space could be? Mm-hmm. There are tables, and there are beautiful tables that are all about the establishment and the man and whatever you want to call it, the system. There are those tables that I sit at. And I amend who I am and how I am to be at that table. But then there are other tables that I've created for myself and my folks where I control the narrative and what we're discussing, how we're discussing it, the ways that we're choosing to address our stuff is coming from our own perspective. So as we look at those tables, do you really want to be at a table that's operating from the same place? Me and those Robert's rules, I hate Robert. I don't know why he came up with rules. They don't work for me.
Parliamentary, yeah. Tell me about labels. Labels seem to be the thing that I encounter more and more in my advocacy journalism. People don't want to be called cisgender. Don't call me that lesbian. I want to be called gay. I don't like people of color. I'm a black person. I'm not a black person. I'm a person of color. There's so many different camps that we all. What is the words? Can't we just all get along? So what's the solution to all the label fighting? Is there one?
There can be if we can all just step back and own ourselves. And there can be if we all understand that there's an evolution to understanding who we are. So when I talk about, we've talked about those gabies earlier, right?
Yeah, well, you and I.
And I love, love, love watching a young person, as we talk about young people, think, in my mind I see a 14-year-old, but somewhere around there, and I love watching that child show up covered in rainbows, right? And I love watching that child attempt to walk in a queer manner. And I love watching that child grab the words that say who they are. And I love watching them cover themselves with labels because they're stepping into who they are, right? And if we ever stayed at that beautiful cusp of identity place, then we've stagnated in some awful ways. But as mature folks who've lived a life, it's really easy to say I'm beyond labels. And I can tell you that from my experience, a lot of cis-het folks who've never been challenged on their labels can speak from this beautiful place of aloofness and say, why do labels matter? I call myself a big old dyke. I watch people's eyes, depending on who and where. Eyes do whatever they are. Depending on the space that I'm in, the words that I use for my race change and fluctuate depending on what that is.
You suit the audience.
To suit the audience, to suit the mood, to suit whatever's happening at that time. So I look at labels as this fun thing to play with. And I forget that for a whole lot of people, they're necessary to brand themselves with, and they're the bane of their existence because other people have branded them with them.
Or they want to claim the label, well, I don't know what you are, but I'm normal. That's the one that gets me.
Yeah, there's the default. Yes, there's a weirdo freak in the default. The weirdo freak in the default. And in my world, everyone's a weirdo freak. Okay, so if you're cooling down, you're a weirdo freak.
Freaky weirdo.
Yeah, this is just life. You can't take it too seriously. I think that one thing that messes us all up is that when we take it very, very seriously.
Manna from heaven. You saying that?
It's just a lifetime. Exactly. That's all it is.
Exactly.
Play with it, have a good time, learn some things, screw up.
Oh, I often say that I learned more from making mistakes than I learned from anything I ever achieved. Yes. The latest Star Wars movie, for cultural reference, Yoda says, failure is the greatest lesson, because you learn so much. And I don't want to fail, but I do, because I'm a human being.
And then you learn a thing.
Then I move on. I only make new mistakes, though. Yes. I try to make the same mistake over and over. Yeah. So you had an opinion earlier before we started taping, in where trans women and women who are not trans can find common ground. And that's from a Wiccan background, you said?
Yeah, in many ways. So my understanding of that comes from a Wiccan space. Because in the Wiccan world, there are different places for different women. And so crones are the old ladies. And if you don't have this wonderful world where you can sit in a matriarchy and love older women, then you know that getting older is the worst thing that could ever happen to you. Things are going to change, things are going to fall, it's going to be horrible. But if you can come from a space, or if you can get to a space where there's this woman-centric thing going on, then there's some wisdom there. There's some, I just don't care about other people's thoughts. I mean, we can think about fried green tomatoes and all these great places where we celebrate women of a certain age outside of Wicca. But again, this beautiful place where crones hold this beautiful place. And the story that I was sharing was about being at this woman's croning ceremony, and they were asking the younger women, so what are your thoughts on getting older, and how do you feel, and all this good stuff. And I remember realizing, like, you guys are having a great time. So other than being scared about peeing on myself, because that bladder thing that you guys talk about does not sound like fun. But other than that,
And it's not.
dude, yeah, I'm a woman of a certain age now.
Yeah, same thing. Well, even when you're trans, it's the same thing. It happens.
You got to find the bathrooms quickly.
That's right. Always
Yes,
know. Always
where they are. But realizing and being there with these women and realizing that there's a special space that was only crone space, that there was no space for me. But then there's also space for young mothers, and there's only space for them there. And so not long after that, there was this conversation because there was a trans woman who was interested in coming into women's space, and there was a lot of hand-wringing. And again, this is life. It's funny. It's ridiculous. Don't take it too seriously. I love these women. I'm sure some of them will see this show.
I hope so.
Specifically, they will. Oh, they will. But there's hand-wringing around, how do we handle this? But it's a woman. It's a woman of a different experience, but it's a woman.
See, that's exactly what I always say. I don't try to be a woman like every other woman, just because no woman is exactly the same as any other woman. There's difference in everything. I have friends who can't bear children. They're still women. I have women, friends who have been through the change, postmenopausal. They're still women. Trans women, just a different kind of woman.
Yes.
It has been enlightening, fun, exciting, and I'm so glad you were able to join us today. I'm sorry that you missed an event, but I'm hoping that this makes up for it somehow.
This does.
That's
This
awesome.
is fun.
And let's have you come back again, and we can talk more about what events are coming up. Will I find events coming up on your website?
You'll find our website now that we've paid for the calendar part. So the calendar will be up there on the website. But if you go to our Patreon, our Instagram, our Facebook pages, you'll see stuff there. I love our Instagram because our Instagram tells a story. You see that I'm pretty good with my words, right?
Yes, you are.
So I can paint a beautiful picture with my words, but if you go to our Instagram, you see actual photos of what we're doing, and that tells the story of our work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This has been great. Come here. First hug I've ever had on Rise Up. Thank you for joining us, and continue to rise up. You'll find links to Kamora's Cultural Corner on riseupwithdawn.com, and we'll see you next time.
And you break it, look around and see that your dream's gone. When the earth quakes, will help and make it through the storm. When the floor breaks, a magic carpet to stand on. We are the world united, my love is so strong. When the radio isn't on, you can hear the song. The guiding light on the dark road you're walking on. The signposts and signs and dreams of